Hello everyone, welcome along, good afternoon, and welcome to a brand new series of Breaking Barriers, the webinar that's brought to you by the PGMOL. It really is great to see so many people at the start of an exciting season, and guess what? We've got some exciting webinars to bring you throughout the course of this campaign. These webinars are genuinely groundbreaking, but not also are they groundbreaking, they offered a genuine insight into the refereeing profession. We brought you officials last year from the top flight, from grassroots champions and several trailblazers up and down the country who were all at the heart of the game we love so much. We even had a Premier League legend join us. We've got some legends coming up today as well. We're really excited about sharing so many more fascinating stories and experiences from all of those people that connect us to the game we love, the beautiful game of football. The focus of this discussion today will be around the LGBT+ community and participation within refereeing. We'll be hearing from some truly inspirational people within the game. But before we do, here's Mike Riley, the MD of the PGMOL, who's actually in the Lake District. Normally he'd be live, but he sent us his words of wisdom ahead of tonight's webinar.
Good morning, everybody, and greetings from a campsite somewhere in the Lake District. I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to be with you live this evening, but probably when you're going live, I'm about halfway down Scarfell Pike, so it wouldn't be very good trying to connect with you at that point. But I am delighted to be able to welcome you all to the second series of Breaking Barriers. This is a really exciting programme for all of us at PGMOL. It gives us the opportunity to really demonstrate that refereeing really is for everybody. And during the first series, we got to learn from the experiences of some fantastic people, showing their experiences and helping us to learn from the things that they've gone through in their refereeing journeys. And I'm really pleased today to be able to start the second series with some great people who are going to tell us all about their experience of being part of the LGBTQ+ community and actually how refereeing has embraced them and their particular journeys. It's fantastic that joining us today, we've got Stacey, we've got Alex and James, all prepared to share with us their experiences so we can understand what refereeing really means to them. I'd also like to thank Mark again for hosting another episode of Breaking Barriers, showing his commitment to the work that we're trying to do. I hope that you all really enjoy this evening's programme and get something out of it and return for the rest of series 2. And now I'd like to hand you back to Mark so we can get the show underway.
Brilliant stuff. Thanks very much indeed, Mike. We'll look out for the holiday snaps of him in the Lake District. Right, let's move on now to the panelists for today's webinar. And we'll start with Alex Baker, who is the chair of Stonewall Football Club, which is the oldest gay football side in the country. I've had the opportunity to watch them on a number of occasions. And you need to be on your best behaviour as well, because Alex is also a semi-professional referee. Alex, great to see you this evening.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here.
Good stuff. Okay, on to our second panelist. Now, the transfer window may have closed. As you know, I love a transfer, but we have got a very special loan for the course of this webinar. It is James Child, who is a rugby league referee. Great to see you, James.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
It'll be interesting to get your perspective on football and see if there's any similarities between the two sports. And of course, last but definitely by no means least, our third and final panelist for tonight is Stacey Pearson, who is a WSL referee. There she is. Fantastic to see you. A real trailblazer in her own right. And she's joined us on a school night as well. So that gives you an indication of, as to her commitment. Just 24 hours before the WSL starts, which is on Sky Sports and the BBC this season. Stacey, great to see you.
Thank you. Great to be here. Good.
Lots of happy, smiley faces for tonight's webinar. So many questions to get to you as well. And remember, you can get involved via the socials as well. It's FA_PGMOL. If you want to ask a question, we'll be taking some audience questions later on in today's show. Thanks ever so much for everyone joining us at home as well. Hopefully you'll enjoy this evening, get some interesting insights into the world of refereeing, particularly from those coming from the LGBT+ community. Let's start with your individual journeys though. Alex, let's talk a little bit about yourself, what football's been for you and your journey into the game, and of course Stonewall Football Club.
Well, I used to play football when I was younger, but I'm unfortunately not very good at it. And so there was a big period in my late teens and early 20s where I didn't have much football aside from being a Leeds United supporter, which at the time wasn't great. I got my refereeing badge in 2009. I'm proud to be a London referee, London FA referee. And around the same time, that's when I came out, and that's when I found Stonewall Football Club, which was an important part of my journey. Since then, I've focused on the refereeing career. I'm now a level 4 referee, and 3 years ago, I was elected chair of Stonewall Football Club, and through that, I've got involved in the International Gay and Lesbian Football Association. I work with some companies on their inclusion policy, BT Sport, for example, and I've recently been appointed as a member of the FA Council.
Alex, I do not know where you find the time to do all of that stuff. James, coming from the world of rugby league, you came out on a BBC podcast. So great to see you tonight. Just tell us a little bit about your journey and what it's like for you in the very different world of rugby.
Yeah, well, I started refereeing aged 11. Was never brave enough or stupid enough. Never quite sure know which one it is, or probably both in my case. But never brave enough or stupid enough to play the sport. But it was something that I really enjoyed watching with my family, and fancied giving it a go. Some local referees where I lived had qualified as junior referees, and thought I would sort of try my hand at that. Wrote to the RFL, and back in 1995 to find out how I became a referee. They didn't respond to that letter, so I had to write again. So I'm sure most fans would have wished they'd never responded, but they did. And that's how I started my sort of refereeing journey, age 11, and gradually progressed through the ranks until 2010, when I became a sort of full-time professional referee with the RFL, and then gradually progressed through there until this year, just before the season started in February, I spoke to the BBC's LGBT Sport podcast. And that was the first time I'd spoken publicly about being gay. Obviously, from a personal perspective, I'd come out many years ago. But yeah, the first time I'd spoken publicly.
Fantastic stuff. And Stacey, let's talk a little bit with yourself. Of course, a WSL referee. You played in the WSL as well for Yeovil. And just tell us a little bit about your journey that brings us here today.
Hi, yeah. So I actually started as a player back when I was about 5 years old. And then it wasn't until, and in fact, I never thought I'd do anything other than play football. Moved up to Yeovil, was playing for Yeovil in the WSL 2 at the time for about kind of 10 years. And then back in 2012, a friend of mine said, "Oh, why don't you do the referees course and become a referee?" And I was like, well, I'm a PE teacher, so it might come in quite handy. And then kind of haven't really looked back since. Got to level 3. Now a referee in the WSL as well. And obviously, started 2010, I was added to the FIFA list. So now a referee internationally.
Fantastic stuff. And you're very much on brand as well. So extra brownie points for wearing the right gear in your referee's outfit for tonight's webinar. Just a quick introduction on myself as well. I'm Mark McAdam from Sky Sports and Sky Sports News. You may have seen me over the course of the last few weeks working hard on transfers. I've been at Sky now for 14 years. I came out as an openly gay man in 2014, so I can identify and understand some of the challenges that people within the world of sport, and particularly in football, have faced over the course of the last few years as well myself. So hopefully I can share some of my insights and understanding on what our panelists have been through as well. The aim of tonight is an open, transparent, fun discussion to try and find out a little bit about everyone's respective journeys, and of course try and help people, those at home that are watching, that want to understand a little bit more about refereeing, and particularly those that perhaps are coming from the LGBT plus community as well. We've heard a little bit from our panelists about where they've come from. Let's find out a little bit about the journey to coming out, which is always a big challenge, particularly when you're in such a sport like football or rugby, where it's dominated by heterosexual men. But things are changing, and that's the great thing about the progression within football, that we know things are very different now to what they were even just 5 years ago. Alex, in terms of your journey and coming out, particularly within football, what was that like for you, and what advice would you give to anyone potentially thinking, I want to be my authentic self and still do the game I love?
So I've got a bit of an admission to make here, which is that out of all of the domains of my life, the last one that I felt comfortable being open about my sexuality was football. I'd long since told friends, family, been open in the workplace, but it took a long while before I was comfortable in refereeing environment, football environment, and it was actually becoming chair of Stonewall Football Club, where I thought it's going to be so obvious to people that I can't really hide it. But coming out isn't an event; it's a journey, and if you're gay, you kind of have to do it all the time, you know. And this is part of the effort, and sometimes it can be a bit exhausting when, you know, you meet a team of 2 or 3 other referees that you're working with for the afternoon, and you know, that decision about whether or not you want to share that part of your life when you've just met them, whether or not that would be appropriate or whatever when you've got a job to do. It's those sorts of decisions sort of factor into it. And I think during that time, during my refereeing career, I was probably still finding out who I was as well, because once you're confident enough to say, well, this is who I am, there's still a journey of discovery about exactly what that means and who you are. So it's only in more recent years that I've been comfortable doing it, and I do feel a responsibility as someone who's comfortable and open in the game to then use that and help others who might be struggling or might lack the confidence to do it.
Stacey, everyone, you know, will automatically think of the stereotypes within women's football, which can often make it much more difficult for someone to turn around and say, you know, this is who I am, this is what I'm about. Your experience of playing in the WSL for a number of years, what was it like for you to come out in that environment?
Well, I actually, conversely to Alex, came out back when I was in school, and it was actually football that made me realise it was a really supportive environment. And I was in year 10 at school at the time, and that, because it was 2002 when Section 28 was still in place. So at that point, it wasn't really normal in schools to be, with my friendship group, to be a lesbian. So football was a really safe space for me up until I came out to my parents when I was 18. I'm going back a few years now, but yes, it's interesting to have the difference in women's football and men's football, because women's football was just so much more an accepting environment. So I never really felt like I couldn't be myself there. It was kind of first of all in school, and then when I felt comfortable enough to tell my friends, I did, and it was football that kind of helped me realise that.
That's so refreshing to hear that it's football that became your safe space. It became your environment to, you know, be yourself, be authentic, and be comfortable in your own skin. And I guess that shows the differences in the women's game to the men's game, the environment, particularly in that dressing room, that changing room, whilst it's probably changed a little bit since then. James, when you look at the world of football, you look at the likes of Keegan Hurst and Sam Stanley, some high-profile rugby players that have come out. Why is rugby so different? Why is there a different environment and culture to perhaps football, do you feel?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really have the answer to that. I think there's been so much press and coverage around there not being an openly gay footballer that I think there's almost a weight of expectation and pressure on someone to do that. And I think that's an additional pressure that perhaps you wouldn't want when you making that decision, as I did earlier this year, to come out and speak about it publicly. I mean, it's a very private matter anyway. But then, as I say, to then become the name, the face of being gay and openly gay in football, I think that's probably the reason why people haven't done it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating to hear that. It is about expectation. It is about pressure, because you know that all the eyes are on you, particularly with you three in your situations, all being referees. The eyes are already on you all the time. There's already that added pressure. So being an LGBT+ referee in these kind of sporting environments, and this is an open question to everyone, do you feel perhaps that there adds that extra level of pressure with not just your sexuality, but because you are a referee?
Well, speaking personally, it didn't add any pressure for me. I think my story probably follows Alex's very closely in that, I sort of gradually come out, to friends, family, and things like that along the way, and came out to my colleagues probably around 10 years ago after an incident involving a head coach of a team who homophobically abused me post-match. And it was the only incident in my refereeing career when I thought I was going to be assaulted. I wasn't. And that led to a disciplinary case. And it was very difficult to have that conversation with my colleagues without actually being open to them. I think they pretty much knew I was gay, but I wanted to sort of be open and honest about them. And then, as I said, gradually over the years, I felt probably more comfortable to do that. But I haven't felt pressure since I spoke publicly at the beginning of this year. And in fact, that my motivation for doing that was because on a fairly regular basis, I was receiving homophobic abuse at matches. And I think from my perspective, it was a fairly open secret. And I thought it was a stronger stance that I could take to come out publicly and say, look, I am gay. It's not something that I'm ashamed of. And if you choose to then abuse me from the stands for being gay, then you're doing so in the knowledge of me being homosexual, which puts a slightly different spin on it from my perspective. And I think I've only had one incident, as far as I'm aware, one alleged incident that's currently being investigated at a game this season since I've come out. And so I actually think it helped, but I haven't felt the pressure. Now, whether that's because Keegan Hurst in Rugby League had already sort of done that publicly from a player perspective, I don't really know. I just think, once you're comfortable in your own skin, then I think that's the position that you need to get to. If people are at home watching and listening to this, and contemplating doing something similar in their sort of social circle, then I would just sort of say that, as long as you feel comfortable in where you are at in your life, then it shouldn't really matter.
So, James, do you think that coming out has actually kind of raised an awareness, brought some level of education to people that are watching you, that actually certain types of comments are totally unacceptable anyway, but now that they're aware that there is a gay man refereeing the game in the stadium, on the pitch, that they have to be even more aware about the language they use, and perhaps coming out has been a really good form of education for a lot of rugby fans?
I'd like to think so, and I'd like to think that the fans can self-police it. I know the game where there was an alleged incident earlier this year, people were filming the incident and used that then as evidence as part of the disciplinary case because they were shocked by it. Rugby League, as I suppose in many other walks of life, it's not had a clean bill of health before. Gareth Thomas transferred when he left Rugby Union to play very briefly in Rugby League and was homophobically abused at a particular Rugby League game, and that club were disciplined for it at the time. So I'd like to think that we have moved on as a sport, and certainly the number of positive messages that I received from officials and sort of fans of the game when I spoke publicly earlier this year was really encouraging.
And Alex, you're on the front face of it. Stonewall Football Club is probably one of the most famous football clubs outside of professional football in the country because of what they've been doing for a number of years. On the front face of it, when you're out there playing in the leagues that you play on a Saturday and a Sunday, I know there's a couple of teams. Do you still feel that homophobic abuse is something that happens regularly? Are you dealing with incidents on a regular basis, or are things changing now because of the awareness that's being created?
So the club's been running for 30 years, and it's really interesting speaking to some of the players that played back in 1991, 92, that sort of period when the club was first founded. And the level of abuse they got was pretty vicious. They would be spat at, names would be called, incidents of coming into dressing rooms and sort of being verbally attacked and so on. I think it's fair to say that that's changed a lot, and that probably reflects a lot of changes in broader society over the years. But one of the ways that the club has tried to address that is by demonstrating that it's, we're really good at football. So actually winning on the pitch is a good way of sort of defeating that view, because then people actually start to respect you as players, and the conversation and the discussion is different. Does it still happen? Yes, it does. And actually, I think more recently, as we've developed our social media profile, what we tend to find is that a lot of the comments tend to occur when we're visible in the media, on social media, when print publications, press publications, the likes of Sky Sports run features on us. You tend to find a lot of comments below the line that are pretty horrific. But that's where we see it mostly now. Actually, out on the green stuff and week in, week out tends not to happen. And the leagues that we're in are really good. One of which is specifically designed to bring inclusive clubs together. But the Middlesex County League, where our first and reserves are in, are fantastic and are women and non-binary team playing the Super Fives, which is a brilliant league as well. So generally not these days.
Incredible. It's incredible to think that in 1991, Stonewall was there at the front face of it, really challenging these issues, you know, in a very, very different time to what we live in now. I guess really, Stacey, for you working in the WSL, homophobic incidents, would it be fair to say they're few and far between, or do they still exist? How do you deal with them as a referee?
To be completely honest with you, in the WSL, I've not had to deal with any homophobia, and I don't know whether that goes back to what I said earlier on about the women's football being a safer space, and what Alex just said about most of the comments that you do see are on social media. It doesn't happen at games or at stadiums, and I think part of that is because of people are kind of behind the keyboard and they think, oh, I can just say what I want. Having said that, as I said, it being a safe space, it's not necessarily my sexuality or women's sexuality that would be problem. It's the gender that we've probably had more sexism than we have homophobic behaviour, which is a shame. But I think with the increased investment and the more media coverage, I think hopefully we'll look to eradicate that. And
Stacey, in terms of the progress that has been made within, particularly within refereeing, I guess you're on the FIFA list of accredited referees now. You're refereeing in the WSL. You played the game. You've got so much experience. Why do you think things have slowly started to change, not just for LGBT people, but why has football suddenly become a more diverse sport, and it seems to be on the right path now?
I think part of it is like Alex said, around the societal change, but also I think an important part is to recognise the allies we have within the football world. And we look at Ian Wright and how he kind of advocates for women's football. The more people that we have kind of advocating for both women's football, for LGBTQ plus communities, I think that we're only going to make kind of strides on improving and eradicating that kind of behaviour. Things
certainly seem to be changing. And like you say, high profile people like Ian Wright talking about the WSL and the environment, the games and the football. And you've seen it on Sky Sports over the course of the last few weeks as we build to a brand new season. It genuinely is gripping people. And I think the changes within kind of people's perceptions of the women's game is massively important as well. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing you, Stacey, refereeing some games this season when they're live on Sky Sports. James, let's talk a little bit about the kind of the attention you get in rugby, the progress that's been made. Why perhaps do you think that the game is in a more advanced stage compared to football?
It's a good question. I don't watch much football, I must admit, so it's difficult for me to draw a direct comparison. But I think, you know, generally rugby league is seen or tries to see itself as a family sport. You know, and it genuinely is. When you go to professional games, you will see, you know, several generations together watching a game. It's not dominated by, you know, men watching the sport in particular. You know, and we've got a wide range of participants as well, from men, women, wheelchair, learning, physical, disabled, etc. So it is a very diverse community that's involved in the game. So I think that's helpful. And I think as society has changed, I think the sport has improved as well. For the first time, we had a Rainbow Laces round in Super League this year. And whilst, you know, it wasn't perfect, it was at least a stepping stone in the right direction. And I'd like to think we can build on that next year when we do something similar. So yeah, I think we're making strides in the right direction. But you know, we've still got a long way to go.
And the fact that you've got someone like Nigel Owens involved in the game as well, how much has he helped to educate and really bring to people's attention, you know, what can be achieved as an authentic person yourself? Like, because Nigel, I think, is regarded as one of the best referees that the game has ever had, and the fact that he's an openly gay man is just brilliant, because what it shows is sexuality essentially is just not important when it comes to being a referee.
Yeah, absolutely. And albeit having said that, it's rugby union and not rugby league, and we're very tribal, and so the way in which Nigel conducts himself on a field is a little bit different to how we conduct ourselves on a rugby league field. At time, he can come across a little bit school teacherish, I think. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to him, because his perception in the public is extremely high as to how he handles players, and I particularly, like some of the exchanges that he has. But the fact that he's a professional rugby referee, yes, and openly gay, is helpful. I think one of the dilemmas I had about speaking publicly was that as referees, we're not supposed to be in the limelight. We're supposed to be in the background. We're just there to do a job, get on with it. And so I didn't want to necessarily put myself out there for any other reason than the job that I do, because my sexuality is irrelevant. So that was the dilemma I had about when I spoke publicly. But as I said, going back, my motivation was to try and help educate, inform, reduce the abuse that not only I received, but if somebody's throwing out homophobic abuse at a game, it may not be directed, or whilst it's directed at me, it may not just affect me. It may affect those around them. They may not realise they are gay, and so that was really the reason that I spoke out. And so, I'm really encouraged as to how we've progressed. We've set up an inclusion board at the RFL in the last 12 months, and I'm part of the working group at the RFL itself, helping to try and deliver improvements across all forms of discrimination in the sport.
Absolutely. And from Nigel Owens being, an icon and someone to look up to in the game, Ryan Atkin, the referee, came out in football as well. I know he's refereed some of your games, Alex, and has been involved with Stonewall. And Stonewall even played a game under the famous arch at Wembley, which I was lucky enough to be at as well, which gives you an indication as to the support that Stonewall's had from the FA. How important is it that we get those messages out there, we get those opportunities, we get that profile in the games, and really show people that football is progressing in the right direction?
So I think all of that visible stuff is really important. Visibility is hugely important. People beat football up a lot, but actually one of the things I've learned is that there's a lot going on in football to make it more of an inclusive space, not just in terms of LGBTQ plus representation, but all of the other strands of diversity as well. The Rainbow Laces campaign has been going a number of years. It seems to grow in prominence, and there's lots of other initiatives going on. I think what I find more encouraging is knowing that there are a number of people behind the scenes in the FA, in the leagues, in clubs, who really care about this issue, and genuinely so, and are doing what they can to make the environments and the domains that they operate in football more inclusive as well. So I feel like the progress that has been made over the last 5-10 years has been really encouraging, and discussions like this are really important in the refereeing pathway as well. The challenge we've got is you can't always tell what sexuality someone is, unlike some other strands of diversity, and so then it's sometimes really hard to know what those individuals need, or what will benefit them in terms of making the game more inclusive. So bringing more visibility to the issue and making people aware, allies aware, is really important.
Absolutely. There's some great allies in the world of football as well. Stacey, do you get a lot of people that contact you and say, I'd like to be a referee, I'd like to play in the WSL, I'd like to follow a similar path to what you've done, but I'm a little bit nervous because of my sexuality. I'm not sure whether I'm going to be welcome and accepted. What are those conversations and dialogues like with young girls that perhaps come to you and say, I'd like to follow in your footsteps?
I think for that, I definitely have had a few people that I know, I've played football with in the past, that think actually knew I want to do a referee's course and become a referee. And the questions around sexuality never really comes in. It's more, I think what puts people off is the gender. So those young girls are maybe a little bit too afraid to start and think that they don't want to do men's football to start with, or boys football. So I think it's a case of trying to encourage anybody to just kind of bite the bullet, because actually my first men's game, it wasn't that scary. It was obviously a little bit scary to start with, but it's just football at the end of the day. So I think once you get that out of your mind, that they can kind of feel a little bit more confident about doing it. It's that initial, I don't know if I should do it. And I just delivered last week on a referee's course, and it was really pleasing to see that there were 4 girls on it. And that's always the first thing I check when I look at the list of candidates I have on a course. And it not once they kind of think about, oh, well, sexuality, it's more that, oh, can I do this? And they're just that little bit less confident than the guys are when you're in a room of 20 people and you're kind of outnumbered. But I think it's just having that confidence in the first place to get it out of the way, and those first few games under your belt, and the sky's your limit. They've also brought in, obviously, a female in your pathway. So to start with, they wanted to get a bit more confident, then they can get on that route.
Stacey, have you suffered any kind of sexist abuse as a referee within the game?
Yes, when I was a level 4 referee, I had to send the assistant manager off for shouting I should be at home doing the dishes, not refereeing a football match. I actually didn't hear it. It was my assistant referee that heard it. So he straight away called me across. And then when he told me what he said, I just kind of got rid of him. And he did argue that it wasn't him. And the manager was like, just go because you said it. So but that's the only occasion. And otherwise, it's kind of more a little bit kind of under the radar stuff. Like I'd turn up to a football match and they'd go, oh, are you the physio? Or, you know, I'm like, no, I'm the referee. Or are you the referee's guest? No, I'm the assistant referee. So it's kind of like backhanded sexism almost.
But things are changing. Things are changing, and that's the important thing, isn't it? And in terms of rugby league, James, when you look at your pathway, your journey, and things, do you think people are starting to appreciate and understand the challenges that you face as a referee, regardless of your sexuality?
Yeah, you know, it's not easy. It was only last weekend we had a referee assaulted on an amateur game, a top amateur game, who had previously been assaulted a few years ago, unfortunately for him. And that situation is very, very rare, particularly in rugby league. But it just goes to show that, you know, we've still got work to do. Whether, you know, that's not necessarily a diversity issue; it's just a discipline issue with individual teams and clubs and things like that. But yeah, sorry, I forgot what the original question was. But
no, we were talking about the pressures of being a referee, regardless of your sexuality. Anyway, all eyes are on you, and it seems that the public are now more aware than ever before that actually you can't abuse a referee. You have to be respectful. You have to watch your language. You have to be supportive, and you have to understand. And everyone's journey to coming out or to talking about mental health or talking about sexism within the game, it seems like all of these building blocks are helping very slowly to create a very different environment for referees.
I think it's very slow, though, very slow. I still maintain that probably one of the biggest reasons why we lose match officials is due to abuse. And that's very, you know, much from the grassroots junior level. If I go watch some of our junior referees and our local referee society, you know, I will still hear abuse on the sideline. You know, you're watching an 8, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s game, something like that, you know. And so we have a long, long way to go. You know, I think there's a difference between what people say and then their actions. And you still hear regularly abuse from the terraces, some of which, you know, can be amusing if it's banter, but, you know, there definitely is still significant, you know, abuse that comes from the terraces. So, you know, in terms of taking up refereeing, taking up the whistle, my advice to junior referees is always that you just have to, like it or not, you have to learn to live with it. You know, that doesn't mean you accept it and you have to report it through the proper channels, but you have to learn to grow a thick skin. And as a governing body, and the same with the FA, I'm sure, we'll be doing everything that they can do to try and improve that environment. And, you know, over the years, it probably has got better. But, you know, I can go back to when I was probably 12, 13 and was abused all the way back from the field back to the changing rooms. And, you know, I was only refereeing a junior side myself, and I was a junior myself. But, you know, those are the days that probably make you stronger. And whether you like it or not as a referee, that's what you will encounter. You're not there to be popular, you're there to make decisions. And unfortunately, I just think you have to accept it.
Unfortunately, you do maybe at the moment. When you mentioned about losing referees to abuse, the main reason why referees decide to stop officiating games, both Stacey and Alex nodded when you said that. Is that something you've experienced? How do you deal with it? I guess a thick skin is one thing, but ultimately it shouldn't be happening in the way it does.
So in terms of I mean, when you start out on your journey, it can be very lonely, and you're going to some scraps of grass in the dock end of nowhere with some players who probably aren't that good at football themselves. And I think there is a view that it's acceptable for all of the players to tell the referee exactly what they thought about the referee's performance, and it's not acceptable for the referee sometimes to turn around and say what they thought about the player's performance. So I do recognise that. There's a lot of pressure. I'm the sort of character who has actually thrived a bit on that, trying to get the decisions right, trying to manage the event. There's a challenge there, and you get a real buzz if you can do that. But I'm not going to deny that pressure exists. I think where I would draw in the LGBT angle is that it is far better if a referee goes into that environment and feels very confident and comfortable in who they are, and that they can be their authentic self in that environment. If they don't feel that they can be their authentic self, I think they're going to struggle more to deal with the innate pressures in the role. Perhaps a particular problem at grassroots and non-league. I hope that Jamie and Stacey have a different experience at their level now.
Remember, you can get in contact with us as well if you want to ask a question to one of our three panelists. It's at FA_PGMOL on Twitter and Instagram. We will be taking some questions from those of you watching from home or the Lake District in Mike Riley's case. So if you do want to ask a question, feel free to hit us up on the social medias, and we will get to those in just a few moments. Just picking up from what Alex was saying there in terms of the abuse and responding to it, having a thick skin. Stacey, is I guess you've had that from the moment that you picked up a football as a young girl, playing the game, playing in the WSL, and then deciding to transition into being a referee. I guess that's part and parcel of it, and then something that you've began to kind of understand, accept, and deal with. Yeah, and then added on top of being a female in that environment, I think had I been younger, I'm not sure I would have dealt with it as well as I did. And I think being a PE teacher actually really helps me as a referee, because I have that kind of almost behaviour management skills. That's effectively what we do as a referee. We behaviour manage 22 players on the pitch. When they do something wrong, we blow a whistle and give a free kick the opposite direction. So I think having those skills and how you can talk to people, and like Alex said, being confident in your decisions, whether sometimes we say, you might not be sure, but if you look confident and they think you know what you're doing, then they're more likely to trust you. So having that thick skin though, because if you get something wrong, you've got to have that ability to reflect on it. Okay, why did I get it wrong? Okay, try and do it next time. Whereas some younger, more inexperienced referees might say, I've had a bad game, or maybe I should just give it up and throw in the towel. And that's, I think, especially when you have a bad game and you get a lot of abuse, I think that's one we may lose referees. And actually just one conversation with somebody else and to lift somebody up could make a difference between keeping them in the game or losing them from it. Stacey, why do you think there is an underrepresentation of females within football, particularly within refereeing, and how do we address that? I think to start with, it's because that there was not a female pathway. You had to kind of start at the bottom of the pyramid, grassroots football, and kind of to progress, you had to go into men's football. Now there's a female-only pathway. I think in the next kind of 5 to 10 years, we'll really see more female referees coming through. I started tutoring maybe 5 years ago, and I've done courses early on where there was maybe 1 or 0 girls, and now obviously there's 4 girls, so that's an increase. And I think we'll keep hopefully getting that increased level of engagement in young females, especially if they know that there's a female-only pathway that they can maybe progress up the female ladder and get to the WSL without having to blow a whistle in the men's game. Having said that, I think it does really help to be able to referee both football, both men's and women's football, because I think you learn a lot lower down. You learn a lot about yourself, about the game at grassroots level, and I think that's probably how I got to where I am today, is because I've refereed both. Really interesting to listen to. I think that's a really valid point there. Learning to referee men's and women's football is going to give you a much greater tool set to be able to, develop as a referee. Let's try and move things forward, because we know that there's been so much progress that has been made over the course of the last few years, particularly with the work that Stonewall have done, particularly with the Rainbow Laces campaign, the fact that media organisations are aware and they're getting behind it, and things are genuinely but slowly changing. James, how can we push this forward? What can we do to make some huge strides forward to improve the lives of referees, but also those LGBT plus referees?
Well, as I said earlier on, we had our first Rainbow Laces round this year, and you know, that raised the issue in Super League. But I would like to build on that next year. And Rugby League doesn't have any inclusive teams. I think it had one at one stage. So compared to Rugby Union, which has a really good IGR network, that's something that perhaps Rugby League could explore. Now, that's obviously not directly impacting on refereeing, but I just think that the greater presence that you have around LGBT issues in the sport will encourage match officials who may be gay, maybe lesbian, to get involved in the sport. You know, we don't have, as far as I'm aware, which I think a lot of professional teams now, they have sort of LGBT supporters groups and that sort of thing. And again, I think Super League teams could introduce something like that. So I think, again, just trying to give people a voice, whether that's you as a spectator, whether that's you that as a player, that you can go and play as part of an inclusive team, or even if it's, you know, Rugby League teams tapping into those Rugby Union inclusive teams and getting those as part of the Rugby League network, then I just think that it's those kind of practical on the ground steps that will really improve things, rather than just, you know, dishing out some rainbow laces and some players wearing them and the vast majority that didn't in the recent round that we had. We need to do far more than that, and I think allyship is such a strong message. If we can get you know, straight players in conversation with if it's another gay player, if it's Keegan Hurst or who's recently retired, or whether it's in conversation with something else about somebody, their personal experience, it may be that they've got a relative or a close friend that, you know, recently came out or something like that. I just think if we can get more straight people talking about LGBT issues, that actually helps matters, rather than just gay people talking about LGBT issues. You're almost talking to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Big shout out as well to Jurgen Klopp, because he wore his rainbow laces last season and was the only manager in the Premier League to do so. Very visible with his support. And of course, the recent interview he did with Cop Out, the Liverpool's LGBT Supporters Association. Paul Mann set that one up, and there was a homophobic incident this season, sadly. But Jurgen Klopp came out, you know, at the start of a brand new season, took time to talk to Paul Mann and listen to, you know, these things and almost educate himself, which I thought was really, really special. James, you've spoken about kind of those allies. How important are those allies? And have you found since you came out that you've had more allies from heterosexual men working within Rugby League?
I've had 2 or 3 head coaches of Super League teams come up and speak to me and shake my hand over the course of this season, just say, you know, really well done for speaking out, and, you know, it's quite a brave thing to do, and that sort of thing. And I think it gives you a different level of respect in one respect. So, you know, I know some people are sort of feel uncomfortable about how do you describe, you know, is it congratulations that you came out and spoke publicly? Is it, you know, something that is brave to do? Well, I kind of I accept all those words. I don't really know what the right terminology is. I just did it because I felt comfortable about myself, and I wanted to do something myself for the benefit of the sport. So, yeah, you know, I think it has made a difference for me personally, and I'm really glad I did it. You know, perhaps I could have done it a number of years ago, but I did it when I felt the time was right. I'd had an offer from Sky Sports a few years earlier to do it, but it was something that I discussed with my parents, and they weren't quite comfortable in me doing it at that stage, and they felt that I would probably receive more abuse. And I think, you know, that the reason I chose the BBC LGBT Sport podcast to do it was because that podcast is a story around people's career, whether that's, you know, as a referee or as a sports person, and then as an add-on to that, it's, oh, by the way, yes, you are LGBT, and what's your LGBT story? And so that was framed very much around it not being a coming out story. It was just this is the first time I've spoken publicly about it in the media, you know, after having just come out of the closet.
Really interesting stuff there, James. Alex, in terms of moving things forward, you're at the front face of it, both as a semi-professional referee and, of course, working as the chair for Stonewall Football Club, which have been doing some incredible things for, like you say, in excess of 30 years now. How do we continue to make these strides forward?
So I'd echo James's comment about allyship. It's really, really important. And what we lose in the game, if we don't all care about this, is we lose talented players who could improve the quality of football that you're seeing, or teammates who could improve the quality of your squad. We lose club officials who would otherwise contribute to the effective running of football clubs, and match officials as well. If you want a rich, vibrant, good game, then you should care about the environment that you're creating and how that speaks to people that might identify as LGBTQ. The other thing I'd say to the referees on the call who are watching is do report incidents of homophobic abuse that come up in your game. It's really important you do that, and for exactly the reason I've just said. It does improve the quality of the game, and it makes me feel more comfortable about being part of the game. There's probably others who would echo that. So if you're not aware of what you need to do, I would encourage you to reach out to your referee development officer or your county, just to understand what the process is. And do take it seriously, because it matters to people like me that the game is welcoming and inclusive. And
of course, if people don't report these incidents, people necessarily won't know that their actions are offensive, they are homophobic, and that's where the educational side of things comes in. In terms of moving it forward again, Stacey, you know, I'm inspired by listening to you, by looking at your journey, by where you've come from and what you're achieving. How again do we take it forward for women, for LGBT women within this game that we love so much?
I don't think it's necessarily just for LGBT women, it's the community in a whole. And I think, just touching on what James said, Alex said about reporting it, it's a terminology that's used by players and by some managers that maybe they don't realise is the wrong terminology. So perhaps there's a piece of work that could be done by the FA or by kind of any organisation, that actually these are the words, if you hear them, please deal with them, send them off, report them. And gradually, I mean, there's referees that we have out there at grassroots football who might have been refereeing for 20 or 30 years that maybe don't realise that what some of the players' terms that they're using are actually homophobic or transphobic. So perhaps that's a massive piece of work that could be done that could move the game forward. And then maybe referees will feel more comfortable reporting those incidents, and then maybe we'll see less homophobia, less transphobia in the game. Having said that, I also think to move things forward, social media companies have to take more responsibility to get rid of the trolls, because a lot of people probably don't feel comfortable. The first Premier League player hasn't come out yet because they don't feel comfortable, and it's because of the online and the spectator abuse maybe as well. So I think they need to take more responsibility, and there has to be more accountability for those that are abusing any of us in our community.
Stacey, you mentioned there the online abuse and the spectators abuse within the stadiums. That's actually one of the first questions we've had sent in to us. If you want to send in a question, then please do. It's at FA_PGMOL on Instagram and Twitter. We want to hear your questions, of course. So let's pose a few of those now. John Duffy has been in contact and has said, Stacey, what more can be done to prevent homophobic chanting and comments from fans towards players and officials?
I think possibly stronger sanctions will help. If the club can identify them, then lifetime bans. If they know that there's a strong sanction in place, then they'll think twice about doing it. I think James said earlier on about more people reporting it. And I think if we have stronger allies and people feel more comfortable at reporting those kind of incidents and having video evidence, then that if someone is out watching a game, whether it's rugby, whether it's football, recording it, then helps the club be able to deal with it, so they can then sanction it. I think that's one way that they can move it forward. And I don't think we're going to eradicate anytime soon. I think it will be a slow process, but by having stronger sanctions, I think that would really help, and education as well.
And to pick up on that point there that John Duffy has said, James, again, it's like Stacey says, it's the education side of things, but having that ability to call things out, people knowing that when they're in a stadium, they're in an environment like that they are going to be pulled out, they are going to be noticed, they are going to be seen and potentially recorded. And this could have a massively damaging effect on so many people's lives. So it needs to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. It's carrot and stick, isn't it? You've got to have sanctions. You've got to have the ability for people to report that. I think most of our rugby league grounds is that, you know, they read out a text number that people can text, you know, an incident to and get something dealt with. Too often I see sort of stewards that have sort of let things go and don't deal with things. But I think we need to get to the point where the crowd almost self-polices it, where people are prepared to challenge one another and say, that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable at our club. You know, and then get the appropriate stewards to deal with the individual or individuals. I think particularly the education, the work around inclusive teams, LGBT supporters groups, allyship is massive. I think that for me is the key. You know, if you've got a 50,000 seater stadium and you've got, you know, thousands of people chanting something, which is what you will get, it won't just be individuals, and that becomes very, very difficult, you know, for a club to manage. So I think that the more sort of education, allyship that we can do, I think that would help.
Absolutely. We've had another question sent in to us from Sarah Holdbrook. Thank you very much indeed for that, Sarah. I guess really this one to Stacey. What advice would you give to a woman new to the world of refereeing?
So interestingly, I had this question a few months ago, and for me, it's don't have any fear, and just go and be yourself. Kind of don't be afraid of what's out there and learn. You're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable. We all make mistakes. I still make mistakes now, but having that ability to learn from them will then increase your confidence level. So just don't be afraid to ask for help, and just get stuck in, really. Absolutely.
Hopefully, Stacey, you're inspiring some young referees for the future. Another question that's been sent in, is there an affiliated LGBTQ plus football league? Alex, you're probably the best place to answer this one as the chair of Stonewall Football Club.
Yes, there are two. So in London, there's a league called the London Unity League, and that's got a number of inclusive clubs. So if you live in London, that's the league to look out for. Nationally, there's a league that's under the GSFN banner, which has been going for a while. So there's teams all over the country that contribute to that. And for women and non-binary and trans players, there's also Super Fives League in London, which is really inclusive. So there's lots of outlets. They do exist. Google is a good way to find them usually if you're not sure what's in your local area. But if you're in London, you've got a lot of choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So some things there I didn't know. That question there from Aina Sylvester. Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll move on to a little question actually that I've got myself that I'd like to pose to the team there, just as a personal kind of piece of insight. You look at, you know, the way things are moving forward, and we'll start with you, James, on this. You must be so proud of what you've done. I know it sounds weird to be proud of coming out, but for me, I'm still lucky enough and privileged to receive letters and emails from young guys and girls that read my coming out journey, you know, listen to what I've had to say, and they see me as a visible pioneer for them, someone to inspire to be like. For you, do you still get that communication? Do you still feel proud that you can affect people's lives in such a positive way by just being yourself?
Yeah, that was, I guess, took me a bit by surprise. I expected it to be generally well received, but I didn't expect to receive as many comments as I got. Sort of private messages through social media. I got handwritten letter by somebody that used to be a referee, sort of an old gentleman, and I got messages from fans that have you know, children that are gay and how they've managed it and how they've dealt with it. And yeah, not proud of myself, but really glad that by me just speaking out about my story, that it's actually helping other people. And that was one of the, as I say, one of the motivations for me doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it feels weird to sort of say you're proud of yourself for doing something, because it doesn't feel that way. But when you have an impact on young people's lives by just being yourself and doing what you've done, it does kind of take you by surprise. I even now, you know, I came out 7-8 years ago, but even now I still get messages on social media from people that are just reading about my story, or they've been watching me on Sky Sports for a number of years and didn't realise I was a gay man. And I guess really, Stacey, for you, that's very similar. You know, you're that beacon, that pioneer, not just as a lesbian, but as someone in the world of football, as a female referee, for everything you've achieved. It must be immensely proud to receive those messages and see that what you're doing is having a genuine effect on young girls.
Yeah, I like to think so. I mean, more recently, obviously, and it was kind of announced on social media, but my partner and I, in our quest to have a second child, we've had 2 miscarriages in the last kind of year and a half. So I decided to do some campaigning, and upon sharing my story, I wanted to use my platform as referee to do that, to try and make some positive change for kind of younger lesbian couples going through this, to know that actually we are going through it. It is difficult, and at the moment there's no funding available for the NHS for same-sex couples. So this is why we want to make a difference that way, and kind of have a positive impact, and started a petition, set that up, and it's got kind of 50,000 signatures. But more importantly, lots of people wrote to their MPs and sent me positive messages since, saying, like, you're brave for speaking out and well done for trying to make a difference. And that's the whole ring, really. We want to try and make a difference for the LGBT community, obviously particularly same-sex female couples, because at the moment they have to have 12 IUI attempts or 6 failed IVF attempts to get any funding, whereas for straight couples you can get potentially up to 3 cycles after only 2 years of trying. So just want to try and make a positive difference. Absolutely.
And, you know, just hearing that, it just seems incredible that there isn't that parity for LGBT couples. And like you say, using your platform as a referee to try and highlight these issues and make change and enforce change and get people talking must be really important. It must be nice to have that platform as a referee to be able to try and enforce change.
Yeah, it's interesting because my partner says, oh, we probably wouldn't get as much traction if you weren't a referee or if you didn't have a bit of social media following. But since coming out with the story, lots of people that I know have been either going through similar experiences or are about to go on an IVF journey themselves. So kind of like reached out to me. So it's nice to be able to give them a little bit of information on it that I didn't have when we started the journey. And there's lots of things that I wish I knew that I didn't know. So now I can kind of like help other people by giving them a bit more knowledge.
I'm sure you're giving them some support and you know, extra positive vibes as well by talking about your journey and particularly in something that can be so heartbreaking, going through those situations and like you said, the miscarriages as well. Alex, I guess really you have so many people that come to you at Stonewall from different backgrounds and diversities and experiences, and they just want to play football, and you know the challenges they face by doing that as someone from the LGBT plus community must be so difficult. You must see so many different people that are inspired by the team.
Yes, but I get inspired by the people who come through the club. You know, I look back to my experience 10 years ago when I had my first session with the club, and it was the first time in an environment that part of me wasn't questioned, and that's the magic of the club. And sadly, it's still needed. You know, there are people out there who find a need for that. But the power of sport to change individuals and the catalyst it can be in people's lives, it's hugely powerful. And seeing the difference it can make to individuals is what keeps me motivated. So I draw a lot of inspiration from that, and it's great to see.
Absolutely. And I'm sure everyone is drawing inspiration from the three of you. I hate to say it, but the hour is upon us. It's absolutely flown by. So a massive thank you to Stacey Pearson, to Alex Baker and James Child for sharing their journeys, their thoughts and everything they've been through as people connected to sport, which is something that unites everyone, of course, for being so honest and open about various situations themselves as well. Remember, you can continue to get involved with the PGMOL through social media, not just during the course of these webinars. There is so much more to come throughout the course of this season. So I am super excited to see what is happening next. I know that there is another one planned for later on this month, another Breaking Barriers webinar, which is going to be featuring some young people that are making waves in the world of officiating. So that's going to be something to look forward to as well. In terms of today, there will be various clips across social media. This session has been recorded as well. So if you want to re-watch it through the social media channels, you can. which is great to see, and go back on some of the insights and thoughts that our panelists have had over the course of tonight. Remember, you can interact with the PGMOL on social media. They are on Instagram and on Twitter. You can see at the bottom of your screen the handle and, of course, the hashtag as well. So make sure you get involved as well with them. And finally, a big thank you to Stacey, Alex, and James. Thank you very much, guys. It's great to spend my evening chatting to you about refereeing, and particularly those coming from the world of LGBT+ as well, which is something close to my heart. So thank you very much indeed for that. And thank you for sharing your words of advice. It's something that we think is massively important to amplify, because with people like yourselves being open in this industry that we love so much, it can enforce change, help create change, and help educate, and the dialogue will, without question, make a big difference to young people's lives. So thank you once again. Remember to be confident, to speak up, to respect and love each other. And of course, don't be scared to talk about these issues, because every time you talk about something in the public domain, it will make a genuine difference to those people in the LGBT+ community. Good night.